We're going to continue. The next matter on the agenda is presentation of 10-year enrollment projections in elementary school space capacities as developed by MGT of America. And I will welcome our speakers from that company, Dodds Cromwell and Joe Clark from MGT. Dr. Title, do you have anything to say, or should we just
turn it over?
Turn it over to them.
I'm moving for a better view.
Okay. We have to move again.
Maybe click, or how close do you have to get to the thing to go on? Thank you. From the first one. Oh, this is just a presentation for tonight. Thank you. Thanks, Ben. That was fast. I know.
1, 2, 3. Got it. Mr. President, can we proceed? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. President, fellow board members, for allowing us here tonight. As Dr. Title said, my name is Joe Clark. We've broken the presentation into two pieces tonight. Enrollment projections is the part that I will address. Mr. Cromwell will then take us through the capacity and utilization of the elementary schools. We've broken the process for the enrollment projections into three areas this evening. First, kind of a demographic analysis of your community, an overview of what's going on, then a look at some of the historical enrollment, and a look at the projected enrollment. First, and I apologize for maybe some of these being too small. We've given copies to the board. You're welcome to follow along in your packet. And we've given digital copies to the staff to post on your website tomorrow. So if you need to, you can go and download this information tomorrow morning. The purpose of this slide is really to demonstrate that you have a demographic shift happening within your district that could impact future student enrollment. And what I want to point out is that this area here, 45 to 54, 55 to 59, and 60 to 65 are all increasing areas of demographic population, where 25 to 34, 20 to 24 are decreasing. And typically those younger population bands are either the group that produces the most children. You can see those older age groups would be beyond childbearing typically, and don't contribute to the school population. So as you look at this, it appears your population is getting older. There is a significant increase at the 15 to 19-year-old population. I think you can see some of that activity going on when we look at some of the high school enrollments, but keep in mind that they'll be moving out, and that could change. That could change then from that being impacting your, this is just another look at that by percentage of population, and again, you can see that a large band of the population is at the 35 and above, and you can look here and see that some of the most biggest increases that have occurred at some of those older populations, with the exception of again, this 15 to 19-year-old population band. This is a brief chart. We won't spend a lot of time on it, but that is building permits of all types within the town over the course of the last 10 years. As has happened across our country, you can see that there's been a considerable downturn in building permits here. The reason this is significant is that in some calculation methodologies, we will create enrollment projection using building permits and then defining a student generation factor from those individual homes or multifamily dwellings that may be going up in your area to determine if the increase in student population is going to occur. With this kind of a dynamic, the likelihood of that is not overwhelming here. Again, live birth rates, another indicator of an increase possibly in student population. For the most part, over the last 5 or 6 years, your live birth rate has considerably dropped. Again, not sure if that's a factor of the economy, the age of the people within the town of Fairfield, but it is an ongoing trend. And these are typically directly related to kindergarten enrollment, which is kind of this slide. This is live births here. This is kindergarten enrollment here. We do this calculation in 2 ways. Correlation coefficient, meaning what's the trend of kindergarten population as it relates to live birth. The top is 1, the bottom is 0, yours is 0.69. It's a pretty indicative correlation coefficient, which means that if you went solely on live births, your kindergarten enrollment would be projected to be going down. We look at historical capture rates as well. This is an interesting dynamic in the fact that it appears in your schools there are a number of young children, and I'm going to say the age of 2 to 5, moving in that are not born here. So you have a kindergarten capture rate of 103%, meaning that if we just looked at what live births would project, you're even getting more than that. We typically label that as an in-migration population. So there are some younger students moving in, or even pre-K children moving into your district, and that has supported the increase in kindergarten enrollment you'll see in the projections. I want to take a minute to look at this briefly. This is your historical district enrollment. And as you look across enrollment and as you break this down school by school, grade by grade, I want you to pay attention to the fact that there have been anomalies that have occurred historically for a variety of reasons. When you look at 848 first graders in 07-08, and the next year there's almost a 100 student drop, when prior to that there had been a pretty consistent growth for 3 years. Here's another significant drop. So as you go through this grid and look at this, there are areas in this historical enrollment that have produced some significant anomalies, and that is why a typical cohort projection, which is historically what the district has done, would tend to project your enrollment going down. That was not the case when we built our projection methodology. So in the projected enrollment, again, you can see that over the period of the next 10 years, we believe that the enrollment in your district is going to average 1 to 3% increase annually across the district. All right? And I've got some historical charts I can show you. That's a typical pattern that you've had, somewhere between -3 and +6% at any particular grade level or grade school or high school has fallen in that kind of range of increase or decrease in enrollment historically, and it looks like some of that trend will continue as we move forward, and your enrollment will increase at about a 1 to 3% rate. I want to talk quickly about the purpose as we came to your school committee and to your school district was to identify other methodologies used for projection enrollment other than cohort. We do a multiple projection methodology. I'm going to explain those methodologies in a moment, but suffice to say, across this 10-year projection, we, for the first 2 years, continued your cohort model to ensure that there was a continuity and consistency as you transition to a multi-model approach. That we just didn't move you from completely a cohort model to completely a blended model, which I'll describe in a moment. Then we took a year and we built a transitional model that said, okay, here's where we're gonna cut the umbilical cord from cohort, and we're gonna move into a weighted model methodology. And we took then the, excuse me, clicked too fast. We then took the last 7 years and we broke this into a weighted model. That weighting is specific to 4 of the models. A 20% weighting to annual percentage increase. And what that is, we'll discuss in just a moment. A 10% model on student households, student generated from households, because you are going to have some building going on, so we wanted to include that. We continued with a 35% cohort weighting and a 35% linear regression weighting. What this allows for the district is to take some of those anomalies. What concerned us is that in a strictly cohort environment, if you experienced an anomaly, a significant anomaly, like that 100-student drop in a particular grade level, until that year is out of those cohort projections, it influences those cohort projections significantly. So until that enrollment got back up to that 805 or 850 level, it was going to show you trending in a negative direction. And we just didn't feel that that was going to be the case in your district. So overall, we look at your district and we look at, again, over the next 10-year period, an average annual increase of 1 to 3%. The methodologies that we used and looked at were average percent increase model, how many students on an average basis at each grade level are moving, how much is that increasing from year to year, a straight best fit linear regression model. We continued some of the cohort survival model influence because it really does allow us to look at grade-to-grade configuration and how that's impacted. And then, as I stated earlier, the student per household model. The other thing I want to just mention in terms of our analysis is that we spoke with a number of people in the town planners. I contacted the Connecticut Real Estate Board. I talked to the Fairfield Real Estate Board just to get a sense of where they thought things might be going from kind of a qualitative standpoint to see if there was going to be an influence occurring here. We've done a number of enrollment projections near and around military bases. And, you know, they're going to get these big influx of troops. It's going to grow significantly. Typically, those troop realignments happen over a longer period of time. A lot of times, those troops that are moving to that base have already had their families. They don't have students in the school district when they come to the base. So we want to look at these qualitative components just to make sure that, you know, there wasn't a large housing development plan, there wasn't a large multifamily residential component and plan, there wasn't a large in-migration population that was going to occur that would unduly influence our projections. Some enrollment conclusions, as I stated earlier, an annual increase of about 1 to 3%. We would recommend, given the anomalies that have happened in some of your historical enrollment, you would continue to use a transition from a cohort to a multi-model approach. Again, that doesn't mean you're leaving out cohort. You're just not relying solely on that one projection methodology for developing your future enrollment. And then continue to examine the enrollment data as you move forward. Certainly as those anomalies balance out, you get into a more traditional straight line regression. You want to make sure that what we're projecting 10 years is going to continue to occur. I'd just like to say in one thing before I close. We've done this across the country, and we have found that in most instances, the variance between our projections and the actual enrollment after 10 years is somewhere between a 1 and 3% variance. So when you look at what we're projecting for your total student enrollment in 10 years, based on the numbers that we've provided you, we do not think, unless something outside of the environment that we looked at changes, we don't think these enrollment numbers are going to be that far off as long as you kind of use this model to project those numbers. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Cromwell and have him do the capacity and utilization, and then we'll take any questions that you might have.
Down. Thank you. One of the, whoops, there we go. I got to learn how to work the computer before I give a presentation. One of the commonest questions we get asked as we do facility planning around the country is what's the capacity of that school? And our answer is always, well, it depends. And then the question is, well, what does it depend on? I'm sorry. Did you hear my answer? It depends. What does it depend on? And it depends on the instructional program. Capacity of a school is not a fixed or static number. They change the instructional program, you can change the capacity of a school. Consequently, when we calculate capacity of a school, we use what we call an instructional use model. And basically what that does is it produces a functional capacity. In other words, how does that school function given that educational program? This is very similar to the model that you're currently using, but I'll show you some of the differences. One of the first elements in developing the functional capacity is looking at your loading factors. What that means is looking at each type of classroom and determining what the capacity of that classroom is based on that program. So for instance, in a general classroom, just for instance, you might have 23 or 25 students, depending on the grade level. But in a special ed classroom, you'd have a much smaller number. So that capacity would be changed for that type of class. So you determine your loading factors, and then we also use a scheduling or grouping factor. And basically, that's just taking into consideration that, especially at the high school level, class scheduling can really impact the capacity of a school. And at the elementary level, it's more of a grouping factor. It's a recognition of the fact that if you have 10 general classrooms and you say the capacity of those classrooms is 25 students per class, well, it just never happens that you get nice, neat packages of 25 second graders and 25 third graders. So it's a recognition of one of the realities in student growth. And then the other area that I want to talk about in capacity was when we were interviewing all the principals, we really heard over and over again that we're really being impacted by a lot of the special programs that we're having. And we've seen this quite a bit across the country. Schools built in the 50s, 60s, and 70s were not designed to house the educational programs that we have now. Special education classes, the extracurricular type of programs that we've added and enriched our educational programs with now. And so our capacity is being impacted by those special programs. And so we want to talk a little bit about that as well. So in the first step, as I said, and looking at functional capacity, is to look at the loading factors. And I've just put up a chart here of the loading factors that we used in your district based on your typical teacher-student ratios for different types of classes at the elementary school, and then the loading factors that the district is currently using. And you'll see that what we've done is used a maximum student-teacher ratio where you're currently using more of an average of a class size. And then we also have a scheduling or a grouping factor of a 95%, which again takes into recognition at the elementary school level that children just don't come in nice, neat packages all the time. And so you're often not able to get a classroom to full capacity even if you wanted to. So how does that translate in a difference? Well, here's an example of one of your schools, and we take the number of kindergarten to second grade classrooms and add a loading factor and calculate the capacity. And you see across that first line, we had 12 K2 classrooms. Our loading factor was 23. You're currently using a loading factor of 21. So for those classrooms, we got a capacity of 276 versus the district capacity of 252. You come down to the bottom subtotal line there, and you can see that we've got a capacity of 636 versus a capacity of 564. Then we multiply it by our grouping factor. So we end up with a difference in capacity of about 40 students on this classroom. So we're typically about a 7 to 8% difference in the capacity using our model than using yours. On the operational capacity, what we did was we took a lot of the areas that we were hearing from principals that have been impacted by lack of space and assigned a deficiency as a percentage of a classroom. So for instance, if you had a science program in a elementary school but you didn't have a science classroom, we counted that as 1. A lack of an art or music room was counted as 1, as a whole part of a classroom. And you could see like a small group room for ELL or MRT, that'd be 0.25 part of a classroom. So we look and count up all these deficiencies, and then I'll show you an example. Here's an example of one of your schools. They had no band room, so we counted that as a 1.0 deficiency. They had no gifted or talented room, and then you can see the other deficiencies that they had there. So we took those deficiencies, added them up, and in this case, we got a total of 4.75, or almost 5 classrooms, equivalent of 5 classrooms that school was being impacted. And then we calculated an operational capacity. And as you can see here, here's the classroom count for that school. And you can see that the K2 classrooms were 9 and the 3-5 classrooms were 9. So we subtracted that 5 classroom deficiency from that total classroom count to see how that was impacting the capacity of that school. And when we did that, you can see that our functional capacity for that school was at 420. No, that's 420. Our operational capacity, given that impact from those program deficiencies, was 307. And then the district capacity was 388. We took the current enrollment at the school, 315, and then came up with a utilization rate, given the functional capacity of 75%. But the operational capacity was 103, operational utilization was 103%. So while it looks like there's plenty of capacity left in that school, it's really being impacted by these special programs and a lack of special rooms. And while you technically can fit those students in that building, when you walk in that building, it's going to feel crowded because you're going to see small groups out in the hallways, you're going to see music on the stage, or you're going to see the art teacher going from classroom to classroom with art on a cart. So it's really something to take into consideration. This chart just shows the calculation of the capacity of all the elementary schools. The first column there is the current capacity as we calculated it using the Fairfield model, and it shows the total capacity of the elementary schools at about 4,900. Using our model, we calculate the capacity of being about 5,300. But the operational capacity, given the program and space deficiencies, is in the 3,900 area. So a lot of your schools are really being impacted by this, these special needs. And then the last chart, and I wish that was a little bit higher. We've taken the utilization rates of all the schools with the 3 different models, and the kind of purple magenta color is when you're over 100%. And you can see as you go across those 3 different models, that operational model shows how much your schools are being impacted by the lack of the special spaces or the spaces to house those programs like science and music and art and the small group special education programs. The bottom line, which is hard to see, on the average, your current model would show you at 97% utilization across all your elementary schools. So really pushing close to that 100%. Our model shows you right at 90%. So we've got about a 7 to 8% difference there. I think you'll see by the color coding, though, we typically recommend that your utilization should be between the 80 and 90%, and that's represented by the green color. That gives your elementary schools the flexibility to accept new students, to move programs when they need to, and to work within the facility. And as you can see, that as you take into consideration that operational aspect, it really does impact the capacity of the schools. So finally, we would recommend that you transition to the model, the functional capacity model that we've used here. I think you'll find that you'll get a much clearer picture of the capacity of your schools, and I really think it's, while the numerical difference isn't a whole lot, it's a much broader accepted approach to looking at the capacity. And then I also would recommend that as you go forward and look at capacity and utilization, that while you don't use that operational capacity calculation to determine the number of students, but you use it to determine the impact of the special programs and the lack of certain spaces that it's having on the educational process. So that concludes our presentation, and we'd be open for questions.
Thank you for that presentation. And there's copies of the presentation on the back table if you're looking for it. Questions? I'll start with Mr. Carey, work our way around.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. I have several questions, if you'll indulge me, through the chair to the MGT team. Okay. Two groups. I'm going to start with the enrollment piece, although I do have a little more concern on the capacity in terms of what we see. So I probably have more enrollment questions, but I think the answers might be easier, hopefully. Can you just briefly explain to us why the cohort survival by itself would be insufficient for this task?
I don't want to mislead you that it's insufficient for this task. I just think because of the anomalies that have occurred in the enrollment that has happened in the last 4 or 5 years, typically if you look at the numbers 03 to 07, those anomalies were causing the projections to trend downward, but your enrollment was not trending downward. And so the model didn't really reflect what was going on in your district. A cohort model is very good for saying how many first graders do I have in this building, and using that to project how many second graders you're going to have the next year. Maybe even taking those first graders and saying, how many third graders will I have in 2 years? But beyond that, it starts losing its effectiveness to project what really might be occurring. So we just thought it was unduly influencing the way the projections were being calculated in a way that wasn't representative of what was happening within the district.
Okay, thank you. I noticed, I'm trying to find the page, but I can't, that you mentioned, I think in one of the aggregate pages, that this didn't include ECC and SPED. I'm assuming it doesn't include, here it is, page 29. So it excludes Spec Ed and ECC. I'm assuming, based on looking at the numbers, it's excluding pre-K as well. We have upwards of 1,100 students on IEPs in this community, so can you differentiate for me what's not included versus what is?
The reason that, yes, it does include the IEP. It does include. Or the preschool program. Because those were capped, right? The preschool program was always going to have the same amount of children in it, right? And so it does include the IEP students. It doesn't include the special ed center.
All right, so that actually should state pre-K and ECC versus spec ed and ECC.
Yes. Okay. Did you say page 28, sir? Excuse me.
29,
Thank you.
at the bottom.
We can adjust that for you, make
No
that
problem.
clarification.
Okay, so one thing I was curious about was the student per household model.
Yes, sir.
And this my curiosity is really around the capacity ceiling for the town of Fairfield. And I'm not sure if your work would get us to that, but to kind of frame my question, in 1972, we had 12,000 students in our school district.
Yes, sir.
And we had somewhere around 4 or 5,000 less housing units. Granted, in 1972, families were larger on average, but did your work give us some idea of what the potential ceiling could be in terms of capacity, knowing that we've had 12,000 students in the district before, we have more housing units, but possibly lesser in terms of the average student?
We didn't address that question specifically in this effort, but we did look at housing starts and the capacity within the town of, how much more can be built out. What we really saw happening is that as this, and this is, I think, indicative of what you experienced in 1972. I think when you look out past this 10 years, which is always very risky in our business, but when you look out past that, you may see even a greater increase in enrollment because as that population gets older, as those people downsize in their homes, this is getting to be an attractive community for home prices and larger size homes that accommodate families without having to build them. And how to calculate, I talked to the planners, the town planners, how do you, because they told me we don't have new housing permits, but we've got 1,100 remodel permits. I don't know how to calculate how many kids would be generated from a remodel permit. But I would encourage you to continue to examine that because I do believe it is going to have some impact, as you said. It's just at this time, demographically, the age of your population is older than it probably was in 1972, and more of the homes in this town were occupied by families than they are now. So if that happens again, and more homes are occupied by more families, I think you can see an increase in enrollment.
Sure. And that kind of leads me into my next question. Having studied this a little myself for the last few years, where you come to is sort of what would be expected. In terms of the economy and that and how that factors in, I know that 20 years ago we had roughly 5,900 students.
Mm-hmm.
We grew to, I think your number was 8,200, so by about 2,000 students in that 10-year period. In the last 10-year period, we grew approximately 1,800 students, and you have us growing just under 1,000 now in this group. Do you think that if the economy rebounds more quickly than the prognosticators say, that this might accelerate more quickly? What kind of factor or bearing do you think that might have in this community?
Let me shine up my crystal ball here for just a moment and give you an idea of what I think might happen. Economically, if housing prices increase, typically you're going to see a higher income level required to purchase those houses. Typically, that is not a young family starting out with school-aged children. So I think you be careful about that assumption, because I think it could go that direction. I would be more inclined to say it is going to go that direction just because of the economic forecasts that I'm looking at don't show a resounding recovery in the real estate market for 5 to 6 years. We have a glut of repossessed homes, foreclosed homes. That model is going to move through the purchasing pipeline. Then you've got a whole nother series of people that we were talking on the way down. I hate to quote statistics, but there is a significant number of people in this country whose home is worth less than they paid for it. So you're going to have another population of of homes that are going to become available that are going to be kind of, pardon my terminology here, but dumped on the market. People are just going to walk away from them. Those two inventories are being calculated at about a 4 or 5 year purchasing rate. That means they won't be absorbed for 4 or 5 years. And that's more of a national figure than it is really specific to your town. But I think you need to look at, the rebound isn't going to be July of 2012 and all of a sudden you're going to have 500 new building permits. I just think you need to be careful about those two things.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the challenges we've had previously, one of the major challenges I think we've had in recent years anyway is projecting building to building properly. Can you give us a little bit of an idea of how you came up with the building by building projections and what you feel the accuracy is of those?
I firmly stand behind the accuracy of those based on the projection methodologies that we used. The calculations are correct. What does that infer? There's a couple of things. I think there's a couple of elementary schools that, do you think they're going to grow to that amount? What we did is we took the historical growth pattern of those elementary schools and mapped it against the projected growth pattern of those elementary schools. And in the historical, it was about somewhere between a -1 and a 6% annual growth rate. And in the projected, it was somewhere between 1 and 5. So the variation there wasn't that significantly different. I think that pretty much speaks to the fact that what happened historically, those bumps, those challenges, district attendance boundary changes, all of those kinds of things have made those historical enrollments appear somewhat consistent, and maybe that contributes to the projection of these enrollments going up. But I believe that what you'll find is that the enrollment projections that we have are almost historically the same kind of percentages of increase over time.
Okay. So to dig into that a little bit, was one of the things that was confusing to me looking at these was how some of the classes articulate, and it might just be a statistical anomaly, or might be something that, but if I took like page 33, for example, Jennings Elementary School, and I were to look at this year's grade, you have it 47.40, and then articulation from kindergarten to first grade is 48 and 43, then suddenly we jump up to 60, and then 73, and then 74. There's actually some more extreme examples. Let me see if I can find one. McKinley, and Mr. Mottola pointed this out the other evening. If we took McKinley, what year do you want to start with, Mr. Mottola, on that? The 13-14 maybe? And so if we look at 13-14 on page 34 for McKinley, we're looking at a kindergarten class of 101 that suddenly goes down to 85. It goes down to 78. And what I'm doing, folks, just so if you're following along in the crowd, is I'm following that class grade by grade. So if you just go diagonally to the right, that's where the numbers are coming from. From 78 to 74, and then we jump right back up to 107 by fourth grade. It seems like there's some pretty wild swings there, and I was wondering if you could help us understand that.
Again, I don't have in front of you right now the historical enrollment for McKinley. I would like to bring it up on the screen if you don't mind.
No, please.
And I could show you just a quick spreadsheet that I put together for both, because I think you probably have those same questions in Stratfield.
Yes, absolutely.
I would like to, first off, have you look at, and I'm trying to find it here on the page, the historical enrollment table. And although it is not school by school, you will also see that there is some pretty significant enrollment changes if you do what you were doing, which is a typical cohort model. So if I look at, for instance, the page 9 is the page I'm referring to. If I look at, there's a 801, and then it goes to, or 792 goes to 784, jumps to 806, 839, 845. There's a lot of anomalies. What I did here is I took McKinley and I took Stratfield. This is the historical enrollment, and that is the percentage of change year to year. I then took our projected enrollment, these numbers here and here being the same, and applied the same calculation to get the percentage of change based on our projections. As you can see, those two columns are not that far different. Again, here at Stratfield, here's your historical. Look at this, 15% change in a single year. If you use a cohort model with that kind of a number in it, it's really going to change what happens 10 years from now. That's why we used this more blended approach to kind of address some of those anomalies that happened in your historical enrollment, because this is all predicated on primarily historical enrollment. And so then if you look at this column again, there's some really wide variances at Stratfield in enrollment from year to year. We're not projecting those wide variances to continue.
So if I understand you correctly, then this is interesting. Your approach is actually muting the impact of those, for example, the year we had 125 kindergartners at Stratfield versus the 75 we expected, as opposed to accentuating it.
I don't consider it muting it. I really tried to take into consideration in this approach giving you a balanced, I could, if you so desire, I could show you the calculations that we did for every one of the methodologies that I approached, and you would see some just huge swings in the variation in those projections. We felt it was in the best interest of the district to try to replicate what's going on historically by putting this blended model together.
And I don't want you to misunderstand the question. Was that my concern was that those bumps were being carried forward and creating unrealistic numbers. But
No, sir.
now that you show this to us, it's quite the opposite, which is eye-opening. All right, so I think that answers my question on that. I do want to, I've used up, I'm sure, most of my time. I do want to ask a couple quick questions about the capacity piece, because I do have some concerns there.
Absolutely. And this was the only other artifact that I had tonight, so I'll turn the lights back on if you don't mind.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Quick, just tactical question, a curiosity question. Is the reason we're subtracting portables out of this because of their negative impact on the core? Is that why they're a complete subtraction in your model?
It's our philosophy that portables, while they're not inherently bad, tend to be misused and oftentimes do create a negative effect. And so when we look at the capacity of a school, we look at just the capacity of the permanent buildings.
Okay. And then I guess the big question and my greatest concern is we're looking at these three numbers here. I think I'm pretty clear from your explanation in the report, the difference between the FPS 21 averaging and your model for functional capacity. My concern, and I guess my question to you is the number of 3938 for operational capacity, is that the capacity we have to deliver our program?
That's a good question. I think if you ask the principals and the teachers, you'll get a resounding yes, because they're feeling the impact of those programs being put in the places that weren't appropriate. But at the same time, that functional capacity says that you've got the classroom capacity for the number of students that we're showing there. But when you look at capacity, it's a more complicated question than that. Or if you want to look at it in a more sophisticated or more in-depth way of what's impacting the delivery of your programs, it's just not the number of student seats you can put in a school. It's how are all those other programs going to coexist together. So I don't want to say that you only have capacity for the 3,900 it's shown in the operational. But I think that's a good tool when you do facility planning to recognize the impact there of programs being put in places that they weren't originally intended for.
So this is a very difficult challenge we have, because this has been an ongoing discussion in our community for a number of years now. You know, on the surface, we have classroom space for all the kids we're going to have. However, what is the impact on the program if we can't deliver the program? And, you know, I guess my concern, and I registered as a grave concern, is if we're short more than 1,000 seats to deliver our program, we have a serious problem here. So I guess I'm just trying to balance what our fiscal reality is in our community, what that reality needs to be to deliver the program from a human resource perspective, and then from a facilities perspective, how do we look at a school that should be holding 400 or 500 children that has an operational capacity of 137?
Let me add, in our typical facility planning projects, we do an assessment of the buildings, a physical condition assessment, but we also do an educational suitability assessment in addition to the capacity analysis. And typically, where we do the capacity analysis and we do the educational suitability analysis, we look at how well that building is supporting the educational programs that it's housing. And typically, we capture this kind of operational number that I'm trying to represent here in that educational suitability assessment. We didn't do that here, but I wanted to make sure that the board and the district understood the impact of those kinds of issues in delivering educational programs.
That's all the questions I have for right now, Mr. Mendel. Thank you.
Anybody else on this side? Mr. Fattabine?
Getting back to the enrollment projections, conceptually, I'm having a little bit of a problem, I guess, understanding some of this analysis at least conceptual level. One is you have certain indicators of enrollment. Those indicators of enrollment you mentioned before are population age brackets, so to speak, building permits, and live births. And it appears to me in your presentation, your data collection, all of those indicators of future population and enrollment are going down.
Correct.
But yet you come to the conclusion that enrollment is going up 1 to 3% a year. And I guess, in my opinion, you have a situation where you have indicators pointing to what would amount to be low enrollment, but yet a conclusion that we're going to increase enrollment. And I guess conceptually, I don't know how you rectify that dichotomy, so to speak, of what the data is telling you, but yet what, or the data used to forecast or predict enrollment versus the actual prediction numbers. And do you have any explanation for why there is that dichotomy of indicators and projections?
I believe that it's occurring because you have a significant population that you're gaining at the kindergarten level through this capture rate that I explained of 103% versus basing it on live births. So there is young students or potential students moving into your district in some in-migration model. The other thing I think that's important to realize is that the 15 to 19-year-old population is the largest increasing population in your community and has increased over the last 9 years from the last census in 2000 till now at about a 67% rate. And that's a bubble that's coming through your high schools that's contributing to these projections saying there's going to be continued growth. I'd really love to answer that question in April of 2010 or 2011 when I have the 2010 census data, so I could really take apart some of those different population segments and examine what's going on with them. That level of detail on census data that's 9 years old is not available at this time. But I would suggest that a number of the populations that we're seeing coming into your district are not coming from those traditional methodologies. They're not coming from live births, and they're not coming from housing starts. They're coming from an in-migration of youthful students, I'm going to say pre-K, is that a new PPK now? Group of students, and then this group of adolescent 15 to 19-year-old kids that seems to be growing. I think both of those are being increased through in-migration populations. I don't know exactly where that population segment is.
If I may, the only comment or I'd have to that would be that if it is in migration, I would have expected to see an increase in that age bracket of population for young kids instead of a decrease. That's the anomaly as well. I don't quite understand. We have the population of the age bracket where there's childbearing age of 25 to 44, say, all decreasing between 2000 and 2008. If there is such an immigration, I would have thought that would have been, of young families with kids would have been captured in an increase in that age bracket instead of a decrease. So that's another anomaly that I understand it's immigration possibly, but yet why is not that bracket of age group increasing in Fairfield instead of decreasing? That I don't understand, but
I'm just going to point you to a chart on page 7, if you would. And if you'll just take a look at the populations 20 to 24 and below to 5 to 9, and look at what those populations have done over the period of this data, 2000 to 2008, I think that's where your enrollment increases are coming from. What we're saying is in the next 10 years, those population bands are going to change. You're going to lose some of the live birth data, as you can see, because it's going down that under 5, negative 10.8, and you're going to lose some childbearing age groups, if you will, because they're decreasing. But your overall increase still continues in those school age bands, which tells me it's people moving here, not being born here, and not building houses here. And that's the data that I could not, and very seldom do we find this data, that a planner, a town planner, a city, county planner would be tracking the family that buys the house and the age of the children that are in that house. And the only time we really get good data to do that with, outside of the historical enrollment data that we built these projections on, is every 10 years when we see census data and we can really digress or digest those in-migration populations.
one other sort of question. This relates to the capacity utilization of the schools. You used a different methodology than the Fairfield Public School System used. And one of your elements in that analysis was this scheduling grouping factor. And I guess I just wanted to see if you can explain it or to me a little better what exactly that is. I'm not quite clear how you determine what that scheduling grouping factor change or what that is exactly.
It's a recognition of the fact at the elementary level. It's a recognition of the fact that students don't come in neat little packages of 30 in each grade level, so that you're going to fill up a classroom every time. So it's unrealistic to think that that's a capacity. Probably what explains it better on the scheduling side, if you take a typical high school schedule, either on a 7-period day or a block schedule, typically that classroom, 1 period a day, is empty because there's a teacher planning period. And so that lowers the capacity of that school by 1/7 or 1/6, or if you're in a block scheduling, by perhaps as much as 25%. So it's just recognizing those kinds of realities and looking at the school process, or the logistics of running a school, so that you're not building unwarranted expectations when you say what the capacity of a school is.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this side? Mrs. Iacono, then we'll work our way around. Go ahead.
Sorry, I had a question pertaining to what was in the slideshow, but it had to do with, it's this utilization chart. this is currently what we have? Is that accurate?
That's the current enrollments from this fall, I believe.
Okay. So currently, if I'm looking at a green is where we would want to be. And this is where we are right now with our schools currently.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'd be interested to see a chart that showed us going out what's green and what's yellow, what's purple. That would be an interesting read, I think.
Could I just ask a question?
Sure.
Are you saying you'd like to see that same chart with the 2020 enrollment?
Yeah, just to know where we're going to be in terms of, because, for example, you're showing right now that Stratfield School is at 88% and it's green, but if you chart out where their capacity or where their projected enrollment is going to be, they're certainly not going to be green if we want to plan for the future. And that just jumps out at me because I know the numbers are so off right there. And then we have other schools that'll really, drop off, which, all this report does is tell us exactly what we already know. We have all the kids in the wrong places in terms of where we have our space and capacity, unfortunately. So it's definitely a worthwhile exercise in my opinion, and you've just substantiated the fact that we do get our children from in-migration, something that we've been arguing at this board table and with other elected officials on other bodies for some time now, and having experience in the preschool world where I sit on the board of a nursery school, I just watch the kids keep coming, and every year we think we're going to have to shut down a classroom, and we end up trying to look for space to add 2 more classes of 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds, because for whatever reason they keep coming. And we're an anomaly in Fairfield in the state of Connecticut, where everyone else is looking at shutting down schools. We're trying to figure out where to seat all of these kids. I'd be interested to see that census data too and try and figure it out. This is an attractive area to live, I guess, and reasonably affordable, so to say, in proximity to New York City. Of course, that's with a great school system, of course. Reasonably affordable is relative, but so, yeah, this has definitely been a worthwhile exercise, and we certainly have a lot of work to do, so thank you.
Since we're going in order, when you get the new census data next year, could this dramatically change, or do you think it'd be around the same?
I think it goes back to this gentleman's question about more being able to put our finger on the pulse of where this is happening. I'm not convinced that in a year this model is just going to be blown out and you're going to wave of folks are going to show up at the door. But there's the potential for that.
All right. Thank you. Mrs. Zani, I have a question. Mrs. Dow? Mrs. Brand?
When I was looking through the deficiencies, what I looked at, we actually were at Mill Hill the other night doing a tour, and it has the smallest APR room and a very high population there. But I didn't see, and please correct me if I'm wrong, deficiencies with cafeteria space. So whether or not it actually met the need, did you calculate that or not?
No, we didn't. We just looked at the instructional spaces. But I would, what's the word I'm looking at? Yeah, I mean, I do think that does have is impacted by the number of students, obviously.
And certainly, when you look at portables and things like that, and then you look at core spaces, that's why unfortunately, I was just in a school district in Georgia. The school was built for 625 kids. They had 815 portables. Across town, school of 450 capacity, they had 325 students. But there was a great educational environment going on in that school, and people wanted to be there. So you kind of have both ends of the spectrum here to look at when you're doing that analysis. But core facilities, libraries, media centers, computer labs, all of those things, they're...
Mr. Liu, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. Just to go along the same line as Mrs. Brand, so I think you had used the word for some of the extra rooms, the special needs, and I think what you meant was the full curriculum, not just special needs programs in terms of capacity, but we're talking about, again, cafeteria, art, science, all of those, not
Absolutely.
just special needs.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And then I have one other question. Just for clarity, these numbers are based, we just passed a middle school redistricting, and so are these numbers based on the old districts, or are they based on the new redistricting in terms of middle school capacity projections?
These numbers are based on the future attendance boundaries that you've approved.
Okay. The new one. They are based on
They're
plan,
they're
based on planning.
on the new attendance boundaries. The projections are based on the new attendance boundaries. The historical enrollment were based on the, obviously the attendance boundaries as they existed at that time, because that's where we took the enrollment from.
Great.
So this, one thing that we were asked to do is to look at this new configuration that you have developed, and then blend that into these projections so that you would have an understanding of, did we change a boundary and now we're going to have a problem, or did our boundary changes kind of line up good? So I think we've taken care of that within the projections that we've provided you.
All right, I don't see any other questions. Thank you for the presentation. Along the line with respect to the audit, and I'll listen to your recommendations from fellow board members, I think this is something we need to look at, digest. The Facilities Committee needs to look at it, and based on it, perhaps come up with some suggestions, recommendations to bring to the entire board. And then, we can, obviously, as an entire board, take some action with respect to our facilities needs based on this information that we've received. Thank you.
Mr. President, I would just offer that if we can be of any assistance, qualifying questions, clarifying questions, if you need us to stop back by, we fly over Connecticut quite often, so we'd be happy to.
You parachute right in, and that's what we'll do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank your staff. Your staff was incredible in this whole effort. As the person that did the audit said, you really have a good team here, and we appreciate all their help in getting the data, so thank you.
All right, we're doing pretty well, actually. Old business, and we hopefully can get through this next section rather quickly. Old business, A, approval of policy, recommended motion that the Board of Education approve policy number 6164, drugs, tobacco, alcohol, as presented at the November 9th, 2010 Board of Education meeting, and as amended. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Iacono, seconded by Mrs. Albin. Any discussion? Public comment on this motion only? I don't see anyone. Ready to vote? All in favor? Aye. Everyone's unanimous on that. Okay, moving along. Proposed bylaw changes. And this was my idea to break this out so it would be kind of easy. Hopefully it's easy and everyone followed along. So B, proposed bylaw changes. Number 1, recommended motion that page 9, Article 4, Section 4, entitled Board Evaluation, be amended as recommended by the superintendent. Do I have a motion for that? Mrs. Zahn, seconded by Mrs. Iacono. Any discussion on this? Yes, Mr. Fataby.
My copy doesn't have the page 9. My copy doesn't have the page 9 that I'm referencing here. So could you, for me as well, maybe for the public, just identify
Sure.
what that change is and what section of the bylaws by section, well,
Yes. This would read,
section 4,
yeah, the corner, Paul, you don't have them right here?
the bottom corner.
The bottom corner, yeah.
Page number.
Page
All right,
number.
9, I got it.
Enclosure 5.
That's this one right here. I got it. All right, I apologize.
Okay,
I'm
that's
just
all
trying to-
right.
Before it goes by me, I just want to make sure we're on the right page
That's
here.
okay. Okay, so we had a motion, a second on that. Is there any discussion on this motion? And is there any public comment with respect to this recommended motion? Yeah. All right. I know. Okay. Okay, I'm ready to vote. All in favor? One down. Very good.
One motion down.
You meant one down.
Number two,
Oh, right.
Number two, recommended motion that page 9, Article 5, Section 1, entitled Regular Meetings be amended as recommended by the superintendent. Got a motion, Mrs. Albin, seconded by Mr. Carey. Any discussion on this? I've been reminded that these are our bylaws. We don't have to take public comment on it, so not to be rude. Any discussion on this? Mr. Fattabine?
Just a comment. This bylaw change relates to the meeting schedule, and in the second line of that, it says the town clerk, well, this is in the schedule on the file with the town clerk, the meetings. And it says normally scheduled on the second and/or fourth Tuesday of the month. I would suggest maybe making an amendment to that to read normally scheduled on the second and fourth Tuesday of the month, and get rid of the /or, which I think may be confusing in the sense they're normally scheduled on the second and fourth. The next line will say the second and fourth Tuesday should be reserved for the board meeting. So as a normal course, it's not really an and/or, it's a and we're going to then reserve those days as well. So on a normal basis, that would be
fine.
my suggestions to amend that. And
So we have a motion to amend this, so it should read, a friendly amendment. Friendly amendment?
Acceptable to the mover and the
Right, okay. So that's a friendly amendment. Everyone in favor, agreeable to that? Okay, that's fine with me. So with that friendly amendment, any other discussion on this? Okay, ready to vote? All in favor? Aye. All right. Next, number 3. Recommended motion that page 10, Article 5, Section 3D, entitled Consent Agenda be eliminated as recommended by the superintendent. Stacy, Mrs. Brand, any discussion on this? All in favor? Aye. Oh, God, what a group. All right. 4, recommended motion that pages 10 through 11, Article 5, Section 4, entitled Order of Business be amended to read as follows. A, the agenda at each regular meeting shall be 1, call to order and roll call, 2, pledge of allegiance, 3, presentations, 4, approval of minutes, 5, public comment, 6, student committee liaison reports, 7, superintendent's report, 8, old business, 9, new business, 10, open board comment, 11, adjournment. And then B, the agenda at a special meeting shall be 1, call to order and roll call, 2, pledge of allegiance, 3, business items, 4, adjournment. C
Don't worry about it.
should read, to encourage public interest, the agenda for every meeting shall be posted on the school district's website and released in advance to the following: 1, local newspapers, 2, RTM Education and Recreation Committee, 3, PTA presidents and PTA Board of Ed representatives. The underline there is new. 4, FEA President Liaison Committee. Italics mean it's out. The underline is new. 5, principals, headmasters, and central office administrators. 6, Board of Finance. 7, Board of Selectmen. 8, any appropriate task force or committee. Italics is out. 9, public libraries, including all supporting materials. 10, any citizen who so requests and is willing to assume any additional cost. Do I have a motion for that? Mrs. Albin, seconded by Mrs. Dow. Any discussion on that? Mrs. Iacono.
I would just like to recommend, amend the motion or correct it, or however this should be, to move public comment in a regular meeting to after new business. The reason for this is a lot of what happens, oftentimes people from the public want to comment after they've heard everything in a meeting, so I think it would be prudent to move the public comment to after new business. The other thing is, I've noticed, and this was one of the things that I had asked for in the last bylaw update when we moved the superintendent's report, is that people tend to leave in the middle of all of our reports, and it's really disruptive to the board. It's hard to hear us speaking with one another because everyone's heading out of the room. So I'd like to offer an amendment that we move public comment to after new business.
Okay. It's an amendment you want to call it a friendly amendment or a
I
substantive amendment?
would love it to be a friendly amendment if
Is everybody
everyone will
okay with
take that.
Okay, let's take it as, yes, Mr. Fattaby.
I'll tell you my thoughts, which may
Okay.
not be popular.
Sorry.
But
Second, let's back up. Friendly amendment, we don't need a second.
Well, for the purpose of the motion, for discussion of. Microphone? Sorry. For the purpose of discussion of the amendment, I will second the amendment.
So we're discussing that amendment.
All right, discussing the amendment. One of my concerns is that in many instances, the board meetings run fairly late. And it's sort of difficult to expect the public that may want to say something to wait to the end of that board meeting. In the past, we've had, trying to accommodate that, we had the business meeting and the educational meeting where the public comment period was flipped. One was in the beginning, I believe, and one was at the end. For that general reason that the public may not have to sit to the end of the meeting to make a comment, they can come to one of the other meetings where they have public comment as earlier. In that line, and in the desire to have public comment liberally, I would suggest instead of moving the public comment, we have a very short public comment period at the beginning and at the end. So they can comment before we vote, and maybe comment, if they so choose, on what we just did, or about some other issue. So I understand I'm not encouraging longer meetings or large numbers of public comment, but maybe you can arrange it so that, and the chair, I would hope, control it, to say that maybe if you comment in the beginning of the meeting, you can't comment at the end of the meeting, or some way to control it. But I think it may be nice for the public to try and accommodate that for them if it's controlled, and I assume it will be by the chair.
Okay, we're discussing this amendment, which I'm not going to call a friendly amendment anymore, so.
It's no longer friendly.
Mrs. Iacono?
I appreciate the sentiment there, and that was something, too, that I struggled with, knowing that we used to have the education meeting where it was at the beginning and the business meeting where it was at the end. However, there are other ways to communicate with the board, and if somebody doesn't want to sit through the entire meeting, that we certainly we can all be reached by telephone, we can all be reached by email. If someone doesn't want to wait to comment till after a meeting, they can reach us in other ways. I would not be in favor of having 2 public comments. I
Mrs.
think
Zahn.
one is
Oh,
sufficient.
All right, since we're only discussing the amendment right now, as for public comment, sometimes we get students that come, and I would not want to see this move to so late. And since we don't vote on anything in new business again, I wouldn't ask that we move this again. The public can stay, hear what needs to be done, and then can comment at the next meeting when we're going to vote on that. So I would not support this amendment.
Anybody else on that amendment? The only thing I would also, I'm sorry, Mrs. Albin, go ahead.
I would agree with Mrs. Zahn. I would leave it at the early part of the meeting. I understand the concern, but I think with this format, I think it's better to have it at the beginning of the meeting.
And then if, a lot of times when we're doing old business, new business, and we're voting on something, the public would have a comment to comment on the motion at hand. So, anybody else over here on the amendment only? Mrs. Brand, go ahead.
I actually do like it, and I would be in favor of it. The only other issue is, again, new business. We're not really voting on anything. Old business, we would. But I do appreciate, it's basically trying to give people the option of commenting on the content of the meeting, basically.
All right, so we have an amendment, and the amendment is to move public comment to after new business. And are we ready to vote on the amendment only? Okay.
Yep.
No public comment, all right. All in favor of the amendment? 2, 3, 4, 5, it passes. Okay, all right. So with that amendment, then we're going to vote on, with the amendment, on the recommended motion. And do I have to read it again, or do we understand what the amendment is? Okay. So now we're voting on the main item with the amendment. Any further discussion on this? All right. All in favor? All right.
Unanimous.
Very good. All right. Moving along.
It's a record for most unanimous votes by the board.
Number 5, recommended motion that page 2, Article 2, Section 1, entitled Organization, Part A, be amended as recommended by the superintendent. Moved. Okay. Mrs. Albin, Mrs. Zahn, second. Any discussion on this? Okay, ready to vote? All in favor?
Look at this unanimity on this board.
I like it. 6, recommended motion that page 4, Article 2, Section 4, entitled Committees, Part A, be amended as recommended by the superintendent. Mrs. Zahn, anyone want to second it for me? Mrs. Albin, any discussion on this? All right, Mr. Fattabine, you got something? Any discussion? Seeing none, we ready to vote? All in favor? Okay. Number 7, recommended motion that page 7, Article 3, Section 4, entitled New Member Orientation, Part C, be amended as recommended by the superintendent. Mrs. Albin, Mrs. Dow, second. Any discussion on this? Doesn't look like it. All in favor? Unanimous. All right. Now, number 8. This is a recommended motion. This is Mrs. Iacono's recommendation. And you have number 6 in there, so you can blame her. I'm only kidding. To adopt the recommended bold highlights and capitalization changes in Article 2, Section 4, Committees, Article 5, Section 6, Public Comment, Section 7, Procedures during Meetings, and Article 7, Code of Ethics, number 9, as recommended by Board Member Mrs. Iacono. Do we have a motion?
Can I, actually, I don't know the proper procedure for this, but this was not intended to be a motion. This was a misunderstanding, which I tried to explain last
All right,
time.
then I missed it.
I was simply highlighting some important points of our bylaws.
Bold.
No, they didn't need to be bolded. I wanted,
All right.
I wanted the body to understand them.
Draw this motion, then.
Yes.
All right.
There's no motion.
There is no
Nobody made the
motion.
motion. On to the next item.
All right.
There you go.
Number 9, recommended motion, this is Mrs. Brand, to add the following language to page 4, Article 2, Section 4, Committees, Part A, Standing Committees, at the end of the 3rd paragraph, and a quote, "Only the board may take action on subcommittee recommendations," unquote, as recommended by Board Member Mrs. Brand. Okay, can I have a motion? Mrs. Brand, Mrs. Dow, second. Any discussion on this? Seeing none? All in favor? Unanimous. Very good. Okay. Thank you. I hope that was helpful, and it was. Thank you. Public comments and petitions. During this period, the board will hear comments and receive petitions from any citizen present at the meeting. Any single presentation must be limited to 2 minutes, and audiovisual equipment cannot be used without the advance authorization of the chairman. The board will not hear comment on individual personnel matters or comments addressed to a specific member or members of the board. Decorum will be enforced. Citizens are asked to comment on any voting item at the time the item is under consideration by the board. Do we have any public comment? Come on up.
Ann Pasco, representing the Fairfield Education Association. As you noticed tonight, your board was extremely well attended, and it was obvious that the topic of concern for those that did attend was the prismatic presentation. And I've been asked to bring to your attention and possibly get an answer at some point. It's gone back to your Finance Committee for questions and answers for prismatic. What will be the method, and how will the public be involved in what those questions and answers are, and how will that be disseminated? A large constituency was here tonight to hear the overview. They also want to know what your specific questions are, what the prismatic answers are. So I've been asked to raise the issue, how will we find that out? And will there be an opportunity for the public to have their questions and answers on certain items? I was asked to bring that to your attention. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Yes, sir.
J. Alfred Dunn. The public was not allowed to pass any comment on this section of the meeting tonight concerning itself with meetings, because it was bylaws. Those of us who do not read history are doomed to repeat it. If one goes back into the history of the Board of Education, decades ago, of course, it will be found that they too only had one meeting per month. But they also found that they almost had to bring pajamas and cots because they did not complete the work that they set out to do in one meeting. That's why they went to two. I will be the first to admit that one is better than two because I'm caught up with sloth. However, this board, this town, this nation is going to be discussing educational situations that's going to challenge everyone, including Solomon. Fortunately, he is not with us. I sincerely doubt that this board will complete everything it set out to do in one meeting. And if you are good, perhaps you can make it. But that means you might have to meet at the curb. Thank you.
Thank you. I usually don't comment on something like that, but I think I need to make this clear, that the difference between last year's meeting schedule and this upcoming year is 2 meetings. That's the only difference. We're going to add a March meeting, so I just wanted to make that clear. Any other public comment? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Kristen McCarthy Vahey, 1625 Melville Avenue. And I just want to note that when I arrived here, a few minutes late, admittedly, to the meeting, there were a number of people in the hallway, and I was disappointed and disturbed, actually. There were members of the RTM, school principals, Mr. Dunn, many other members of the public who are standing in the hallway unable to hear the presentation and to have access to what was presented. I understand that there is videotape and that things will be available on the website, but it's not the same as being able to fully participate in the meeting. And I just ask that you consider that in the future as this conversation about the audit goes forward, or any other topics that will have an anticipated attendance. It just allows for a fuller participation for people in the process. So thank you for your consideration.
Okay, seeing none. All right, we go to report of the superintendent, healthy food certificate update.
All right, I have, I'll try to make this quick owing to the hour. Notice in the future meetings, superintendent's report is earlier, when you're more alert. And I've got a few documents on the healthy food certification. I will send those out to you in a Friday packet, but I just want to say that we have received a very positive response from the state about our participation in the healthy foods, an email from the head of the foods telling us we've done an excellent job with the healthy food certification, and we've put together a document of all the improvements we've made to the food service program as a result of the healthy food certification, and we will send those out to you. But I just want to say we're making progress on it, and I think that's been, there's always bumps in the road, but I've got a list of about a dozen enhancements we've made to the program, and we'll send those out to you, which are well above and beyond the just basic requirements of healthy food. So we've taken the charge seriously, and we're continuing to upgrade that program. It's not done. We're just moving on that. First student, about the first month I was here, we opened school, we had a couple accidents, one of which was fairly serious. If you remember, the one up on Burr Street. And like flares went off in my head, like, what's up with this bus company? Are they making sure, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? It's basically. And so I was concerned. So we basically called the senior vice president of operations from New Jersey and several other high-ranking people, and Mr. Cullen and I sat him down and said, all right, tell us what you're doing, prove to us that you're meeting all the safety requirements, the training requirements, the continuing education requirements, the recruiting, and so on and so forth, so that we could be assured that, accidents happen. I mean, there's no, we got a lot of buses on the road, but I just wanted to make sure that we're on top of it on our staff, and also that they know that we're on top of it. And so actually what we ended up doing was, in the course of this meeting, created a report form, which I'll send out to you, a blank one, so you can see what it is. Every month, the bus company is sending to us accidents, categorizing them as preventable or non-preventable incidents, whether there's any injuries, how many random drug and alcohol tests they've scheduled and completed, how many safety meetings, who attended, who didn't attend, breakdowns, whether the breakdowns were on the road, in the yard, whether the preventive maintenance has been performed, in which week it was performed, whether the cameras on the buses are checked, operational, non-operational, have they been repaired, if not, the GPS systems we have they been checked, are there problems, have they been repaired, the radios, the drivers, recruiting and retention, number of applicants, how many are in training, how many have the license, how many have left, and so forth. So we're going to get this every month from First Student, and we are just letting you know that I had this heightened awareness of this, and we've met with them, and the reporting is going to start, and they know that we know that we're not happy with some of their performance. I'm just letting you know that. Okay. There's no action on your part. I just wanted to let you know, because getting too many emails about bus accidents, in my view. And we have this company for 2 more years. The 10-11 budget, there was some discussion last board meeting and at the Finance Committee meeting about the current budget and the potential deficit in the budget for this year, owing largely to some unanticipated special education costs. That is a moving target, as we said before. It was even a moving target as we met with the Finance Committee. And the fact is that in the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've now done our official filing with the state for excess cost. Even at the reduced excess cost rate, we're going to get more money back because of these things. So we are now anticipating that budget deficit is substantially less than it was before, probably in the 500 to 600,000 range as opposed to the million range. It's a moving target. Kids can move in, kids can move out, but things are on the upswing there. We are putting a plan in place to freeze non-essential spending in the special ed area to compensate for that, and working with Mrs. McQuain on that. And I'll tell you, the genesis of this is going to play out in the budget, and it sort of goes into the budget process. We have not done a good job of budgeting our special ed expenses here. All right, we're constantly over budget with that. Now, we're not alone in that regard. I was in a meeting of superintendents just last week, a legislative breakfast. 2 or 3 of them talked about multi-million-dollar deficits in their special ed accounts. This is not something unique to Fairfield. For example, when we budgeted for out-of-district tuition, which is a big fluctuating factor, we did not budget, as I understand it, for any new students who might come in as outplacements. We budgeted who we have, moved them forward. No new kids. But historically in the district, we've gotten, say, 5 or 6 new students net over the course of the year. Well, what that does is it builds a structural deficit into your budget. So money you thought you had budgeted in other accounts really isn't there because it has to get frozen so in other words, what I'm going to try to do in this budget, this is a preview of coming attractors, try to more closely match the budget to the actual expenditure. So, you cannot budget the full amount in special ed tuition and hope this is the year you don't get any. But hope is really a lousy strategy. So I just want to play that out a little bit. Some of this can be remedied, but some of the consequences of that remedy aren't all that pleasant. But we're on top of it. It's not unique to Fairfield. It can change month to month, and we'll keep you posted on it. Okay? But we're not in a panic. On the 11-12 budget process, aside from the audit that I didn't realize was going to be 260 pages to absorb, it'll be interesting that some of the changes that I'm proposing in the way we do our budget, whether they show up in here, they may or may not, We are, first of all, of course, we're using our Munis software to develop a budget for the first time. This is a huge amount of work on the part of Bonnie and her staff. But we are making some changes about what areas of the budget that remain at the school site and some areas of the budget that will be at the district level. And when she talked about technology and the inequities of technology across the district, this has come because, some of it because of the way we've budgeted technology. So in my proposed budget, we're not reducing the amount of money we're spending on technology, but it's going to be centrally funded. And so we can start to remedy some of these inequities in equipment and software that have grown over the years. Nobody's at fault. It's just that it's what happens when you sometimes do school site budgeting. So in an effort to try to remediate some inequities across the district, to keep us a system, as opposed to a confederation, I like that as a former history teacher. It reminds me of the Articles of Confederation, and we know how well those worked. And if you don't remember the Articles of Confederation, I'll be happy to give you a short lecture on it, but not at this hour. Anyway, and also all staff costs are going to be generated from the central office level, so principals are not allowed to take their allocation and buy a paraprofessional with it at the expense of technology equipment or something like that. So staffing is going to be more tightly controlled because, again, that's a big area to keep consistent. And some of that's grown apart over the years. Substitute teachers. It's a peculiarity of Fairfield. It's always been budgeted out at the schools. And so the principals are trying to juggle, gee, if I have a bad run of the flu in my building, where am I going to take it from? Do I not buy books because I've got to hire subs? And so that is off their plate. I mean, they still have to pay attention to it, but all the budgeting, for example, for substitutes is going to be handled centrally so that principals don't have to make a choice about instructional supplies and a sub. It's not a good choice to have to make. So, and interns are all going to be budgeted centrally, the lovely interns that are being recommended. Whether it's zero or, I mean, I'm not necessarily in agreement with that recommendation. So whatever interns I do recommend, we're going to do centrally, because what's happened there is, and this is also a general theme, we have budgeted a lot of times the same thing in 2 or 3 places in the budget. Right? Interns are an example. Right? Interns started to get more expensive, and schools couldn't afford them. And so we started budgeting, 2/3 of the cost of the school, and then we picked up the other third as called district support. We sort of subsidized it. It's like buying a Prius, okay, with like a tax break. So we're not going to do that anymore. Things where there is where we could, it's not 100%, where there are multiple accounts purchasing the same thing, we're putting it in one place and then giving that control to the appropriate person. So, we've got some things where I think the same thing might be bought in 3 different places. It just makes things confusing. So this is sort of a simplification procedure. I'm driving Bonnie crazy, okay, because this is changing her life. And so there are, so we are involved in sort of a simplification process. We're also involved in deciding and some things that we're budgeting centrally are going out to the schools. So it's not all coming centrally. So that's sort of the big, in simplification, and when we finally get the budget done, then the next thing will be generating a new format for you all to review as a budget document. Because everybody has seemed to think it's difficult to comprehend. That's stage 3. First, we've got to get to the number and what's going to be in there, and then we'll have a budget document for you as well. So just let you know, we're still on the same timeline. It was in your meeting dates in January. We're scrambling, but it's like a preview of coming attractions, okay, what we're doing with this. And the last thing is, 10 minutes, 10:20. I'm all right. I got 2 minutes. All right, racial imbalance. The board was required to submit an amendment to its racial imbalance plan to the state to remedy the racial imbalance that we're at McKinley having an overly large percentage of minority children compared to the rest of the district. We had a plan. We had to submit an amended plan. Normally, these things just fly through. This State Board of Education decided to get more active in this, and they decided that they wanted me to come and explain the plan because some of them were having concerns about it. Not just our plan, but there's 6 or 7 districts, but now the State Board is taking a much more active role in looking at these plans and they want more proof that will actually work. And so I went up there. Several of the state board members suggested they didn't think the plan would get us there, even though we're fairly close to being in compliance. So I now have to go back in February with more detail about our plan, how we think it's going to work, and lay that out. They're not asking us to do anything right now specific. There's no magic thing we have to do. There's no radical step we have to take. But I just wanted to update you that this plan we approved back in September, that we thought was a fairly routine thing, is getting some bounce back. They didn't give us a lot of time to go back because this state board is evaporating at the end of February. The governor is going to appoint as many as 8 new members to an 11-member board. So they wanted one more shot at this. And so if this board doesn't take it, the new board will take it up. We had a meeting of the task force last week, the week before. It's all blurring together. When was it? Last week? Last week. And 2 representatives from the state board came down. We had asked them for technical assistance. These are attorneys on the staff, and they've really been working with us. They're on our side. They were from the state, and they were here to help. And they worked us through what some of the issues were, that they had no magic. They had not seen the board this active on this before. They were shocked by it. So I'm going to work with the staff to come up with ways we can enhance our positioning, but anything that's significant will come back to this table for a vote. I'm not going out on a limb on any of the stuff. And so what I can tell them on February 5th may not be a whole lot more. So if there's stuff we can do internally, it doesn't require your action, we'll do it. If not, I'll come back and we'll have to put our heads together on what the next steps are. So, and that is my report.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Through the chair to Dr. Title, I was actually looking at when the board, it says on December 22nd, relative to the budget process, that the budget is determined.
That's a
And
hope.
That's a hope. And then that the budget gets delivered to the board on January 12th. What I was wondering is, there's a time where you have at least your draft that you're sending to the printers. Is it possible to get us a copy of the draft sooner? I keep coming back to it. It's an enormous budget, and we're cramming for 2 weeks.
I know it is.
Yeah.
I will do my best. The problem is, and we just went through
And I
round
know
1
it's hard.
today.
I know.
I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to have the budget determined by December 22nd. At the rate things are moving, that's looking shaky. But we need time. That window of time, they're going to love this out there. Bonnie and Margaret Murray are looking at it. That's our very short window of time to reformat this entire budget and put the document together.
Oh, God.
Okay, so it's not a matter of everything's ready on December 22nd. That's like, we think we have a bottom line number, and from there, we have to actually produce this document that's not going to look like the one you saw before. So I will do my best. I can't promise you, because that's when we're going to be doing we get back on
fair
the
enough.
3rd. I mean, the more I think about this, the harder it's going to be to meet that timeline. But so I think we're going to be busy just to hit that one.
But I appreciate you trying. Thank
Right.
you.
It's I understand the concern, but we're really backed up on this one. Good point.
Okay, thank you. Reports, members of Board of Education, Kathy Albin, anything? Sue Brand, any reports?
Yeah, the Board of Health met last night, and they are still working with Dr. Title and the staff on Ann CABE in doing a policy about medicines being used by students in the district, and that is in the works right now. The other thing is that I believe some of you, or actually all of you, are also aware that CES has allowed us to now have 2 representatives, so I will be joining Mrs. Albin there.
Thank you. Mrs. Dow, anything?
First, thank you to, is this working? Thank you to Dr. Title for giving the report of our last finance subcommittee meeting. So I can skip that. Nothing from CABE, and SEPTA. I just want to remind people or inform them, if they hadn't heard, that their SEPTA's annual cookie walk will be Monday, December 20th, downstairs in the foyer of this building. And if you haven't been familiar with it before, they do bake the cookies. They each, member is baking 6 dozen cookies. And you have to get there bright and early, or they sell out. It says they're there till noon, but usually I think they sell out by 9:30?
Yeah.
Or
There's a race to the cookies. Absolutely.
So, yes, so go early, and we will thank you for your support in advance.
Okay. Mr. Fadby, anything?
No report.
Mrs. Iacono?
No report.
Mr. Carey.
Very briefly, the Facilities Committee met last night. We toured Mill Hill School and saw some areas that were deficient in terms of educational space.
Understatement.
Yeah, without getting into too much detail, I have seen now the smaller space in the district that we're educating children, and that was a little unsettling. As well as the profile picture that the reporter put up of myself filling up most of the closet. So both of those places were remarkable. We've now seen that the three next schools that are on the list for the facilities plan. Obviously, we have a lot to absorb with the MGT report here and consider, and that's really, I think, the next part in terms of the committee members understanding this a little better and starting to incorporate this with the staff into how we move forward in the facilities plan. So that's pretty much where we're at with that. The bulk of the rest of the meeting was consumed with kind of preliminary on what we heard tonight. PTA Council, two things of note. One, Al Kelly, who was chosen as the Alice B. McGrath Award winner for the year. If you've had a child who's been in a renovated or added on or new school in the last 10 years, Mr. Kelly most likely was involved. He's been a citizen who's been very involved in helping us and the community grow the space for our students, so it's well deserved. In addition, Dr. Title gave a preview, a thumbnail of his vision for the district, which I believe Mrs. Brand was there to observe with me, and I must say it's only a 20-minute presentation, but I'm very excited about what I heard, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing that fleshed out in full at this board table. I think the direction that our district will be going and the areas of focus and discussion moving forward are going to be something that are going to be very exciting for our community, so I was excited about that. And that's my report.
Thank you.
Mr. Mottola?
Sure.
I believe last night that your subcommittee also made a plan to approach the first selectman about, I'm sorry, thanks.
Yeah, so one of the ongoing issues we've had going back and forth in the community is Mr. Cullen's team's been looking for some information to help fill out some of their planning on an annual basis and a long-term basis. One of the ideas that was bandied about was to use the Town Facilities Commission and request that they assist us in strategically looking at some spaces for central office in the event that the owner of this building purchases it, a maintenance facility that we have, which is quite pricey at this point, and the alternate high school space, which I think at this point Mr. Cullen's team's done a pretty good job of working out with the First Selectman staff. And we kind of had a discussion about that, and the consensus was to have Mr. Mottola, Ms. Iacona, and Dr. Title address that directly with the First Selectman and see if we can move forward to make sure that we have the information we need for future planning.
Yes, we'll be doing that soon. Okay, Mr. Liu, any reports tonight?
Good news. I hear that the TP&Z has passed the plans for the Fairfield Woods Middle School.
Right, that was tonight, right?
And that was tonight. And did you, Dr. Title, did you hear from Principal Hatzis? Any more details? Or?
That's all I know.
Okay.
All I need to know.
That's, yeah. And we have another building meeting for the Fairfield Woods on Thursday.
My turn. Anything? That's it, Mr. Liu. Thank you. I don't have anything really to report except tomorrow night I get to go to my first Parks and Recreation Commission meeting. Lucky me. Actually looking forward to it, to be honest with you. Something different. Yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be voting on, protecting squirrels in our parks and things of that nature. So,
Seriously.
look, you can
No,
tell
seriously, you're going to build a new thing down at the Beanery or whatever.
That's right. And that's it. And then we have Mrs. Zahn.
Yeah, your Curriculum Policy and Special Programs meeting minutes are in your packet, and the Scholarship Foundation doesn't meet until next month.
Okay, next matter is open board discussion, soon to be open board comment. Not tonight, still discussion. Anything? Nothing. Okay. Motion to adjourn? Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you. Good meeting.
time in the air. You're like an airplane pilot. You took off late.